Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the YouTube channel Doctor's Wisdom Share. The topic that I would like to discuss and share with you today is blood donation as a way of sharing life. Back in the early years of the 1990s, students from medical universities and medical pharmaceutical schools responded very actively to voluntary blood donation movements that were organized on a large scale. I myself was a medical student in the early 1990s, and I must say that at that time the world was in a state of blood shortage. Blood shortages existed everywhere, in almost all hospitals. And this shortage did not suddenly appear at that moment, it had existed long before that. The reason was very simple. At that time, we did not yet have organized blood donation movements. So blood shortages had been there for a very long time. It was not something new. But fortunately, in the early 1990s, medical schools initiated a voluntary humanitarian blood donation movement. The very first source of blood donors came from medical students like us. At that time, humanitarian blood donation clubs were established. I have to say that those days were extremely vibrant. The activities were very intense and energetic, and that spirit has continued all the way until today. Today, what I want to share with you are many stories. I must say that these are very meaningful memories from our earlier years. They are stories about how we encourage people to donate blood for patients. These are experiences that our generation went through, and they were extremely emotional. When people talk about blood, it immediately feels like something strange. It is a term that sounds odd, even frightening. That is why most people are afraid. They do not want to give away their blood. And if someone receives blood from another person, they often feel as if they owe a lifelong debt. They feel that their life has been saved once again, that something extremely serious and overwhelming has happened. In other words, blood creates psychological fear on both sides. There is fear on the side of the donor, and there is fear on the side of the recipient. Even within families, sometimes relatives do not want to donate blood to each other. They are afraid that drawing blood will cause harm, that it will lead to problems, that it will be dangerous to life, dangerous to health, and so on. It was only when leaders of universities and leaders of the government themselves came forward to donate blood in large numbers, and fortunately, when some high-ranking leaders participated in humanitarian blood donation campaigns, we had the opportunity to spread those images. More importantly, we were able to spread a sense of reassurance to the public, so that people would feel safe enough to donate blood. We worked quietly, silently, step by step. From medical schools, we moved to pharmaceutical schools, then to hospitals, then to healthcare facilities. Eventually, we tried to mobilize youth unions. We made efforts to reach the Central Youth Union, with the goal of encouraging volunteer student teams to gradually participate in blood donation. I believe that this was a truly great revolution in blood donation among the public. It created blood resources that have helped patients all the way up to the present moment. And this achievement was the result of continuous effort from students to senior medical professionals of earlier generations, and then gradually spreading throughout the entire society. Everyone, in one way or another, eventually faces life and death. And when people face life and death directly, they realize how precious every single drop of blood truly is. Everyone has extremely touching stories related to blood donation. There are many people who celebrate what they call their second birthday. Why do I say second birthday? Because if they had not received blood transfusions, they would have died. They would not have survived. But because they received blood, they were born again. That is why I call it their second birthday. I would like to tell one specific story. I still remember that day very clearly. At that time, I was on duty. Suddenly, an alert came through our medical system. There was an emergency notification through the hotline, reporting that there was an extremely severe trauma case. It was a very serious trauma. A red alert was issued, meaning that everyone had to go to their battle positions. As soon as the red alert was activated, our hospital immediately mobilized teams. One team was responsible for abdominal and thoracic surgery. The other team was responsible for emergency resuscitation and intensive care. They were dispatched immediately. In less than 15 minutes, the ambulance was already on the road, running through red lights, and even driving against traffic, going as fast as possible to reach the hospital. Later, the ambulance crew told us that they could not even imagine that they had driven at such high speed that night, and yet they still managed to arrive in time to save the patient. That night, during my shift, it was around 3 a.m. when I received the patient. I had already received orders that I had to be present immediately in the operating room area and the surgical emergency resuscitation unit in order to examine the patient, perform a comprehensive assessment, and evaluate the overall condition of the patient, essentially to determine the prognosis. This was truly a battle of terrifying intensity. This patient was 30 years old. He had been stabbed by another person 3 times with nothing more than the tip of a small fruit knife. The knife penetrated his abdomen. When he was brought into the hospital, he barely managed to lift his head and say exactly one sentence: "Please save me." He managed to say only that one sentence, and then he collapsed immediately on the spot. Fortunately, at that very moment, the hospital director happened to be inspecting the emergency department. He immediately saw the situation and ordered that the patient be transferred straight to the operating room. With such a critically ill patient, an abdominal trauma patient in hemorrhagic shock, sending him directly to the operating room was an extremely important command. There was absolutely no preparation time at all. I myself, personally, have also faced situations like this many times where I had to make such decisions. When patients arrive in critical condition, sometimes all I can say is straight to the operating room. That is the shortest and clearest command possible. And then everyone has to run very fast to save the patient's life. The patient was transferred directly to the operating room. Immediately, the medical system issued alerts to the Department of Health and to other hospitals, asking them to prepare for support. Once the abdomen was opened, the surgeons discovered that the patient had a laceration of the left gastric artery. That artery was spurting blood violently, spraying continuously, and the blood flooded the entire abdominal cavity. They continued to explore further and discovered that the hepatic vein had also been torn. Once a vein like that is torn, the situation becomes terrifying. It is almost impossible to control the bleeding. The patient will continue to lose blood until death. There is essentially no mechanism that can stop it completely. In addition to that, there were multiple other injuries: pancreatic rupture, perforation of the stomach, injuries penetrating through the liver, injuries extending up to the right diaphragm and the left diaphragm, pneumothorax and hemothorax. The patient's life was, without exaggeration, under immediate and severe threat. What I personally consider to be the most remarkable part of this story is how quickly the hospital director reacted. He immediately realized that the key to saving the patient at that moment was blood. With this level of blood loss, the only thing that could save the patient was blood. If we waited for blood to be delivered from the National Institute of Hematology, that is, from the Central Blood Bank, the patient would not survive. There was simply not enough time. Therefore, blood had to be obtained on the spot and transfused immediately. The director immediately ordered that all departments suspend their activities and that all staff report to the hematology department for blood testing. However, another serious problem emerged. This patient had blood type AB. Blood type AB is extremely rare, and now, given the massive blood loss from our trauma experience, we knew that patients like this might require dozens of units of blood, possibly 20 units or more. If incompatible blood were transfused, the patient would die from transfusion reactions. In massive transfusions, we can only transfuse incompatible blood when the volume is very small. But in this situation, with tens of units required, transfusing incompatible blood would cause coagulation disorders, shock, and other extremely dangerous complications. Therefore, the blood had to be of the same blood type. A blood type AB is extremely rare. With rapid emergency testing across the entire hospital, we were only able to identify to people with blood type AB. Just to people, and no more than that. Then, a hospital driver received a phone call at home informing him that there was a critically ill patient in need of blood and that the blood type was rare. He immediately mobilized his family members to come to the hospital. After testing, one of them turned out to have blood type AB as well. At the same time, a female caregiver who was taking care of the patient, saw how severe the patient's condition was. She volunteered to have her blood tested, and fortunately, she also had blood type AB. So in total, there were 4 people with blood type AB. Blood was immediately collected from these 4 individuals, totaling 10 units of blood. Additional blood support was also delivered from the National Institute of Hematology. Altogether, we finally had enough blood to treat the patient. I believe that this was the key factor that saved the patient's life. When the patient later came under my care for further treatment, I had the opportunity to speak with the patient's father. I asked him, "Do you know who donated blood for your son?" He told me that he had asked very carefully within the family, but they did not know. He said that at that time, he only knew that there were several medical staff wearing white coats, 1 driver, and 1 person who was taking care of the patient. That was all he knew. As for their names, so that the family could formally express their gratitude, no one disclosed that information. So why were their identities not disclosed? Because when people have done something that we consider heroic, especially in the context of blood donation, they do not want their names to be revealed. They also do not want anything in return after donating blood. Even though they know very well that the drop of blood they gave was the chance that saved the patient's life, they still do not want the patient or the family to feel indebted, to feel obligated, or to carry that burden for the rest of their lives. And that is precisely the ethical principle that exists in healthcare today. Humanitarian blood donation is considered a very normal act, something ordinary, something that anyone can do. I want to affirm something very clearly here. In my hospital, and in many other hospitals as well, every now and then there are blood donation campaigns. And I can say with certainty that healthcare workers, especially young medical staff, donate blood in large numbers. They are enthusiastic. They rush to donate blood. They feel that this is a contribution to society, a contribution to patients. No one feels hesitant or conflicted about donating blood. That is why, on the occasion of today's program, especially when tomorrow is Humanitarian Blood Donation Day, I would like to call on everyone. I want to call on all citizens to go to hospitals, to healthcare facilities, and to designated blood donation centers to donate blood. In order to save patients like the one I have just described. Working in the medical field, I understand more deeply than ever the reality of blood shortages, especially during periods close to the Lunar New Year. That is why, from time to time on the internet and on social media, we see urgent announcements saying that a patient with blood type A or another blood type is in critical need of blood, asking people in nearby areas to help. The shortage of blood, scarcity of blood is a real and chronic problem. It is not something temporary. It is an ongoing issue that has existed for a very long time, and it is extremely challenging for the healthcare system. There are many reasons behind this shortage. For example, back in our time, we relied mainly on students from medical schools. After that, we tried to expand to students from other universities. Gradually, we reached other groups, such as soldiers and other organized forces, to encourage them to donate blood. But clearly, if we rely only on students, the system becomes very passive and unstable. Here, I want to emphasize that blood donors must be diversified. We cannot rely on only one group of people. Even today, although we have diversified somewhat, the reality is that ordinary citizens still do not donate blood very often. We still largely depend on government agencies, mass organizations, unions, and institutions. Hospitals and blood banks have to go directly to these organizations, mobilize leadership, and then launch donation campaigns. Only then do we see large numbers of donors. This is one of the major difficulties. Another difficulty is that blood is not something we can simply draw and immediately transfuse into a patient. Of course, technically, blood can be transfused right away. But the problem is that transfusing whole blood is very dangerous. Blood contains plasma, and plasma contains many components. Within plasma, there can be pathogens, and there are many substances that can cause allergic reactions, shock, or even anaphylactic shock, which can be fatal. That is why, when blood is collected, it must go through a process of separation. Red blood cells are separated. Platelets are separated. Plasma is separated. If a patient lacks red blood cells, we transfuse red blood cells. If a patient lacks platelets, we transfuse platelets. In this way, transfusion becomes safer. In addition, blood must be thoroughly tested to ensure that there are no diseases. Even though donors are screened and examined beforehand, once blood is collected, it is still possible that a problem is discovered later, making that unit of blood unusable. In that case, the blood must be discarded. Therefore, from the moment blood is collected to the moment it is stored in the blood bank and finally used for a patient, the entire process is extremely complex and difficult. It is a long chain of steps, and each step requires time, technology, and cost. This is another major reason why blood shortages persist. Meanwhile, the general public often does not understand this process. People tend to think in a very simple way. They think, clearly, the number of patients who need blood transfusions is small, while the number of people who can donate blood is large. Everyone has blood. So if many people donate blood, how could there possibly be a shortage? I often give a very simple example. I compare the process of collecting and processing blood to agriculture, growing and harvesting crops. For example, imagine a glass of fruit juice that we drink. To make that juice, we must first grow fruit, such as oranges. If we harvest oranges and eat them fresh, we can only eat them for a few days. If we cannot consume them in time, they spoil and are wasted. If we want to preserve them, we must process them into juice. To do that, we need factories, storage facilities, and an entire supply chain. This system is extremely complex and requires significant investment and cost. Even if we have a very good harvest, if the harvesting and processing system is not adequate, we still fail. And if, in a certain year, there is a poor harvest due to natural disasters or other reasons, then we simply do not have the raw materials to produce juice. This is exactly what I want to illustrate. Blood is similar. It is not simply a matter of taking blood from one person and transfusing it into another. Another deep and often misunderstood difficulty is this. People think that one donor gives blood to one patient, and that is the end of the story. From a purely logical perspective, if many people donate blood and only a few patients need it, then blood shortages should not exist. But people do not realize that a single trauma patient may require blood from dozens of donors. A burn patient may require blood from 20 donors or more. In the case I mentioned earlier, it was fortunate that for donors, plus additional blood from the blood bank, were enough. If a disaster occurs such as a fire, or even a single traffic accident involving 5 or 6 injured people, that situation becomes completely different. At that moment, the issue of blood becomes terrifying. It creates enormous pressure on hospital leadership and on the medical teams providing treatment. Everyone becomes extremely tense. This is why, even up to the present day, blood shortages have become a chronic problem. Blood is an extremely special product. It is extraordinarily difficult to produce, process, and store safely. In addition, there are psychological barriers among the public. Many people are still not ready or willing to donate blood, except for young people, who today are relatively enthusiastic. Middle-aged people, people living in rural areas, and many others may care about the issue, but they are still hesitant. I want everyone to imagine this. If one day you yourself are in a situation where you urgently need a blood transfusion, but there is no blood available, what would that be like? When we think about that possibility, we will naturally become more active and more supportive of humanitarian blood donation. Surely when many of you go to donate blood, the first thing you do is open Google. We type in questions like, what are the benefits of blood donation? Or does blood donation harm health? I believe almost everyone does this. Before donating blood, we all search for information like that. As for me personally, because I am a doctor, I always think scientifically. I do not think based on rumors or hearsay. Even when I read information published in newspapers or media, I do not easily believe it. I always look for scientific data, for reputable research sources, to see what the reality truly is. Personally, I always try to look at every issue objectively, comprehensively, and from many different angles. I never stop at just one viewpoint. Humanitarian blood donation is no different. When people say that blood donation has many health benefits, or on the contrary, that blood donation is harmful to health. I look into many reputable scientific studies from medical libraries to see what the evidence actually says. I look to see whether blood donation has any proven benefits to health and whether it has any proven harm to health. And what I see is this. I do not see any reputable scientific articles or research studies that conclusively state that blood donation is very beneficial to health, such as claims that it helps with weight loss, reduces blood fat, or lowers cholesterol. People sometimes imagine that if there is fat in the blood, then by donating blood and removing blood from the body, fat is also removed, and therefore blood fat is reduced. From a purely mechanical perspective, the idea may seem to make some sense. However, in reality, I think this idea has been exaggerated too much. Personally, I am very concerned with whether something is truly beneficial or truly harmful. So the first thing I do is go to medical libraries and search the scientific literature. And what I find is that there are no reputable studies demonstrating these claims in either extreme direction. I believe the reason why such studies do not exist is very simple. To prove that blood donation is beneficial to health, researchers would have to randomly select people from the general population and conduct studies on them. But in reality, everyone who donates blood is carefully examined by doctors beforehand. Only people who are healthy and meet strict criteria are allowed to donate blood. That means the group of people who donate blood is already a very healthy group. So studying whether blood donation harms their health becomes meaningless, because they are already healthy. And studying whether blood donation benefits their health is also problematic, because people with conditions such as high blood fat or other health issues are not even allowed to donate blood in the first place. For example, people with high cholesterol or high blood fat are not permitted to donate blood. If they cannot donate blood, then how can anyone claim that blood donation reduces blood fat? It simply does not make sense. That is why researchers do not focus on studying whether blood donation is beneficial or harmful in that way. Therefore, I can say clearly that many of these claims are simply subjective interpretations or overgeneralizations rather than scientifically proven facts. From my own observations, I can say this: people who donate blood generally do not experience any serious problems afterward. I have personally asked many people who have donated blood 30 or 40 times. They all tell me the same thing: I feel completely normal. I have no issues at all. In my hospital, there are department heads who have donated blood 30 or 40 times. There are many of them. They are cheerful, healthy, and have no problems whatsoever. They donate blood regularly and do not experience any health issues. So from direct observation and practical experience, we can see that blood donation, at the very least, does not harm health. As for health benefits, there does not seem to be anything particularly remarkable that needs to be emphasized. However, if we analyze this scientifically based on what we learn in medical school and in clinical practice, we know that blood is produced by the bone marrow. Many people worry about this. They ask me directly, "Doctor, if I donate blood, will I develop bone marrow failure?" This is a very common question, and many people are genuinely afraid of it. I believe this fear has been exaggerated far beyond what is reasonable. Let us talk about how blood is produced. Blood is produced by the bone marrow. If you buy a bone and cut it open, you will see pinkish tissue. That is the bone marrow. Bone marrow produces blood cells and all the components of blood. This is a simple way to understand it. Now the question is, how much blood can bone marrow actually produce? If we allow bone marrow to function normally, without suppressing it, it can produce enough blood for us to live up to 800 years. Yes, 800 years. But humans live, at most, about 100 years. That means we are wasting the blood-producing capacity of the bone marrow for about 700 years. So if our bone marrow is capable of producing enough blood for 800 years, but we only live for about 100 years, then we are wasting 700 years worth of blood production capacity. That is a huge waste. The human body is very intelligent. It has an extraordinary regulatory mechanism. Normally, bone marrow is red. But sometimes, if you cut open a pig's bone and see that the marrow is yellow instead of red, that pig is weak and unhealthy. Red marrow indicates active blood production. Yellow marrow indicates something else. When the body only needs enough blood to sustain life for about 100 years, what happens to the remaining capacity? The red marrow gradually converts into yellow marrow. What is yellow marrow? It has two main components. First, it contains fat. The body converts some of the marrow's components into fat and stores it there. Second, it contains stem cells for blood production, but these cells are suppressed. They are not actively producing blood. They remain dormant. This is essentially wasted capacity. And in most cases, once red marrow converts into yellow marrow, it rarely converts back. The reverse conversion yellow marrow back into red marrow can happen, but it is minimal and very limited. Most of the time, the marrow remains yellow, storing fat and inactive cells, and that capacity is wasted. In some cases, this even contributes to other health problems. When the body suddenly needs a large amount of blood urgently, what does the bone marrow do? It does not rely primarily on converting yellow marrow back into red marrow. Instead, it rapidly increases blood production in the existing red marrow. Let me give you a very simple and relatable example: influenza. Everyone has had the flu many times in their life. When you have the flu, you often experience a very specific symptom: deep bone pain. Your bones ache so badly that it becomes unbearable. Why does this happen? This symptom is actually very interesting and very important from a medical perspective. When you have the flu, you are infected by viruses, and sometimes there is also bacterial superinfection. At that moment, the bone marrow has to be mobilized to produce a massive amount of white blood cells. That rapid production of white blood cells triggers inflammatory reactions. Chemical mediators of inflammation are released. These substances are extremely sensitive to nerve cells. As a result, they stimulate the nerves inside the bone marrow and cause the sensation of deep bone pain along the bones and marrow. So every time you have the flu, your bone marrow is mobilized intensely to produce blood cells. And this level of mobilization is many times several times, or even far more than, what happens during a single blood donation. Donating 1 unit of blood is insignificant compared to the blood production demand during a single episode of illness. And that is not even counting other conditions, such as viral fever, trauma, infections, or other diseases. In all of those situations, the bone marrow must be mobilized to produce large amounts of blood. If a person is healthy and not suffering from disease, the bone marrow does not need to be mobilized intensely. In that context, donating blood once is negligible compared to what happens during illness. So why should we worry? From a logical standpoint, we can be completely reassured that blood donation does not harm health. Based on this analysis, I hope that everyone listening will understand this clearly. Let us not waste those 700 years of unused blood-producing capacity. Instead, let us donate blood to patients in need. We can donate periodically, according to medical advice, at appropriate intervals based on each individual's health. By doing so, we perform a meaningful act for society. With the development of science and technology today, all of you know that science has advanced at a tremendous speed. Medicine has also made what can be called miraculous progress. We can clone many things, and yet, blood is always in short supply. So the question I want to raise is this: why don't scientists research and produce artificial blood? This is actually a very good question. We have chronic blood shortages, right? No matter how much we mobilize the entire population to donate blood, we are still short of blood. So why don't we simply produce artificial blood and transfuse it to patients, especially when science has developed so strongly? Technologies related to cells and biotechnology have advanced enormously. In recent weeks, we have heard news about transplanting pig livers into humans, pig kidneys into humans, and before that, even pig hearts into humans. We have been able to raise genetically modified pigs whose organs are compatible with humans, and we can transplant animal organs into the human body. So why can we not produce artificial blood to transfuse into patients? The reason is this: up to now, scientists have managed to produce some substances that can temporarily replace certain components of plasma, and some substances that can partially replace red blood cells. But these are used only in extremely critical emergency situations, when there is absolutely no blood available. And after using them, they often lead to a series of unpredictable consequences. That is why their use is minimized as much as possible. For decades, science has tried to produce red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells, and other components. But in the end, scientists have had to accept one reality: blood must still be taken from humans and transfused into humans. Why is that? Because the human body is incredibly complex, far more complex than we imagine. Our knowledge has reached the moon and Mars, but that knowledge still represents only a very tiny fraction of what exists. Even in mathematics and theoretical sciences, it has been proven that human understanding is always limited. It cannot surpass certain thresholds. Our understanding of blood is the same. We think we understand red blood cells very well, their structure, their functions, but in reality, we only understand a small part. We can create something that looks like a red blood cell, something similar, but once it enters the human body, it does not behave the same way. It cannot function properly. It is fundamentally different. And blood is not just red blood cells. There are white blood cells, platelets, and many other components. There are countless interactions that we cannot fully understand. Our knowledge simply cannot grasp all of it. To produce a product that is truly equivalent to blood and can be safely transfused, that is beyond our current scientific capability. Another reason is this: blood is an extremely delicate and sophisticated system within the human body. Its level of complexity is astonishing. Scientists estimate that if producing an artificial heart, an artificial liver, or an artificial kidney is already extremely difficult, then producing artificial blood would be hundreds or even thousands of times more difficult than producing those artificial organs. That alone tells us how impossible this challenge currently is. If one day science does reach that level, then humans would no longer be humans as we know them. Everything would become robotic. We would create bodies, then inject artificial intelligence into them, and they would become machines, not real human beings. But we are living human beings. Living human bodies require living cells to carry life within them. If we transfuse substances that do not truly carry life, the body will fail. I have mentioned this in a previous program. I once talked about the case of a cancer patient. When we provide nutrition through intravenous feeding, we take food, process it, refine it, and inject it into the bloodstream to sustain life. But if we truly believe that intravenous nutrition alone could sustain life fully, then we would not need agriculture at all. We would not need food. We would simply manufacture substances and inject them into our veins every day. But I can guarantee you that if we lived like that continuously, we would die very quickly, because those substances are not truly living products. They cannot sustain life in the long term. The same principle applies to blood. Life must follow nature. Nature here means our own blood. And if we do not have our own blood, then we must use blood from other humans who are biologically similar to us. That is why I say this: no matter how advanced science becomes, at least for the next several centuries, we will not be able to reach the point where artificial blood completely replaces human blood donation. So if blood donation is not enough, then why don't we consider buying and selling blood? This is a very interesting topic. It is so interesting that it deserves an entire separate discussion. Even specialists in hematology have discussed this with me, and they themselves are conflicted and uncertain about the issue of blood trade. We need to understand this. In developed countries, blood donation is extremely common. It is legally regulated. Blood donation is considered a civic responsibility and a civic duty. Voluntary awareness among citizens is very high. Globally, there are two systems: humanitarian blood donation and blood trade. These two systems are clearly distinguished. Many people believe that blood is something sacred, something strange, something special. Therefore, blood should only be donated voluntarily, not bought or sold. Blood should be given altruistically and received altruistically. That has been the traditional viewpoint. However, this viewpoint has gradually changed worldwide. The World Health Organization still calls for voluntary blood donation, but many countries recognize that donating blood does not harm healthy individuals if done properly and scientifically. So why should people who are financially struggling not be allowed to donate blood in exchange for a certain amount of money? Let us understand something very important. Today, we no longer transfuse whole blood. Blood is separated. Red blood cells are separated. Platelets are separated. Plasma is separated. Plasma contains extremely valuable components. It contains coagulation factors. It contains immune factors. These substances are incredibly valuable and more valuable than gold. They are used to produce immune products, clotting factors, and vaccines. Their value far exceeds that of gold. However, to utilize plasma fully, we need advanced technology. Without that technology, we can only separate blood components for transfusion. Most plasma cannot be processed into valuable products and is ultimately discarded. The amount that can be effectively used is very small. Plasma that cannot be processed cannot be sold. No country will buy it. As a result, by relying only on humanitarian blood donation, we are wasting an enormous amount of plasma. I am not making a grand proposal here. I am simply offering an observation, something for us to think about together. When public awareness changes, when society's mindset changes, then the higher levels of social structure and policy making will also change accordingly, and more appropriate policies may be developed. Given the limited time of this program, I will leave this future discussion open. Before concluding, I would like to make a small call to action. You can go to healthcare facilities to check your health status and see whether you are eligible to donate blood. You can contribute a small amount of compassion to the community to those who urgently need blood. Through today's program, I also want to say this: humanitarian blood donation is similar to weight loss. When we are losing weight, sometimes we skip a meal. Skipping one meal does not harm us. In fact, it can even be beneficial. Blood donation is the same. It supports a healthy lifestyle both physically and mentally, and it creates positive ripple effects throughout society. So why don't we go to blood donation centers from time to time and donate blood to help patients in need? Remember this: one drop of blood given is one opportunity for life to be reborn. Before ending the program, if you would like to stay updated with scientific and useful information, and if you would like to help spread this knowledge to the community, please like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And goodbye. I look forward to seeing you again in future programs.